We are the Heritage Network Youth Forum, previously Heritage Trust Network Youth Forum. The forum was founded in 2022 by a trainee of Heritage Trust Network at the time, Heritage Network now. She's called Faye, and she was, I think, asked to kind of form a youth group for the network due to kind of there being a gap in the heritage sector where there's quite a lot of young people who want to access heritage and lots of heritage organisations that would like to engage with young people, but there didn't seem to be a kind of overarching place for those young people to get peer-to-peer support, careers advice and other resources for getting careers in heritage and kind of accessing the heritage sector in a slightly more informal way. So the Youth Forum is made up of a group of 18 to 30-year-olds, roughly. We aren't too strict with you if you're a little bit older than 30, that's absolutely fine, but we are all 18 or above, and we are all interested in heritage in some capacity. That might be through doing heritage as a degree, it might be more as a hobby. Most of us are interested in having a career in heritage in some way. Some of us are in our first jobs, or some of us are in our kind of trying to find that first heritage job. Some people are students. And so there's a mix of young people interested in heritage in the Youth Forum. And the forum itself kind of takes on lots of different activity. We have a number of groups and subgroups that do different activity. At the heart of that is co-creation. So the idea is that we all work together and form our own goals and our own ideas of what we would like to see and do within the sector, and we work together to try and make that happen. There are various groups within the forum that do different parts of that. Not going to get into all of them, but there's this podcast subgroup, there's a placemaking one, equity, diversity and inclusion subgroup. There's a subgroup that are making kind of an advice library for other young people. And then there's also kind of a steering committee that help with the strategy and help putting on events and doing other things that the Youth Forum wants to see. And our goals are kind of to be the voice of young people within the heritage sector. We're UK-wide, so not constrained to one place within the UK. And I think that's about all I can think of that we do within the forum. But there's lots of activity, there's lots of people, and there's about nearly 250 of us now in 2025, which is great because we started with a relatively small group and it's grown massively in the last 3 years.
Podcast Subgroup are a bunch of young people that are part of the Youth Forum that basically just love to talk about all things heritage, and we want to get our voices heard and we want to kind of advocate for young people, and we see podcasts as a good way of doing that. We love podcasts ourselves. So why would we not want to get involved? It's open to Youth Forum members and we're always welcoming and would love other people to join us.
My name is Izzy, or Isabella. I'm based in the Brecon Beacons National Park, Brycheiniog, and I wanted to get into heritage and the heritage sector initially because I just really enjoyed my history degree, and I wanted to find a way of making that enjoyment that I enjoyed from my history degree into a job that I could be paid for, and getting into the heritage sector seemed like the best way to do that. And then along the way, in my journey of finding a career within heritage, I've discovered that I also really enjoy learning about built heritage and the history of buildings and kind of the social history of buildings particularly. Currently, I would consider myself to be early career. I've had a few small roles within the sector and then started with Heritage Network as a heritage trainee for Wales in 2023. And since then, I've had one other role with the network as a project assistant, and I've just started a new role as development and outreach officer for Wales and conference organizer, which sometimes feels like quite a big jump from being a project assistant, but I'm starting to settle into it and really looking forward to getting a bit more stuck in. My favourite heritage site is a little bit of a cheat in that it's a whole city. My favourite heritage site is the city of Venice. I studied the history of Venice in my undergraduate degree and ended up writing my dissertation on a very niche, specific part of the social history of Venice and its people. But I really enjoyed learning about kind of the whole picture of the city throughout the early modern period is when I studied. So throughout kind of the medieval into Renaissance period of time, looking at every aspect of the city, the people, the buildings, the politics, the social side of it. And I managed to go on a trip there when I was writing my dissertation and got to stay there for a few days and actually walk around and really felt like I was like embedded in the history and managed to give all of my friends that I went with basically free tour guided view of the city because I knew so much of the history about it at the time and kind of my love for it grew more then. And I just really love Venice, and I really like how quiet it is. How and I don't mean that in terms of tourists. I know that it's very busy tourism wise, but just the lack of traffic there because it's all boats. And the water kind of muffles the sound of everything, and it also reflects all the light back onto the buildings. And I think it just is great. I really love it, and could probably talk about it for a long time, but that's where I'll stop.
So, hello, I'm Emily. I'm originally from Cambridge, but I'm now based in the Scottish borders. I went to uni at Glasgow and studied theology, kind of by accident, but what I focused on was the history of religion. And before that, well, actually, no, just after I graduated, I kind of realised that the sort of thread that had gone through my whole life of the things that I'd found interesting were history based or going in old buildings or just anything old, really, old things. And the last couple of years, I've been working as an apprentice in the Scottish Borders with the local Archives and Museum Service. So that's given me a really good hands-on experience of that side of heritage. I don't know if I'll go into, I probably won't become an archivist. That's not necessarily where my passion lies, but definitely research and researching stories and public engagement and education through historic artifacts and stories. That's where my real passion lies, and that's kind of what I find most rewarding, because I kind of think that if you've got all these old artifacts and you can do the research, there's no point doing it if there's no one, if you can't tell it to anyone and make some kind of impact or gain some kind of new audience who maybe weren't interested in it before because they thought it wasn't for them, or they hadn't come across a story that chimed with them. So that's where I am now, career-wise. So still very early career. And what I've written here is that my favourite heritage site, there's lots, and I run an Instagram account where I look at old churches and things like that, but haven't picked a specific church. But this time I've chosen Culzean Castle, which is on the west coast of Scotland, so just underneath Glasgow. It's a National Trust property, and it isn't a castle, it's more of a big house with huge sort of battlements, but it looks down over the sea, so you've got the best of both worlds really. You've got this beautiful blue sea below it, and then above it you've got this lovely old house with walled gardens and a huge conservatory. I remember when we visited, they had an orangery, and I don't know whether it was to keep pollinators in or something like that, but they had lavender plants spilling out of the windows. So when you walk past, you just got this lovely smell of lavender. That's what I remember the most. But yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm also based in Wales, same as Izzy, but in the south, in Cardiff. In terms of sort of my connection to heritage, it's always just been something that I've really enjoyed since childhood. I've always loved exploring different heritage sites, and I always loved how currently, like now, how nature really seems to harmonize with like heritage sites, and they do become quite little havens and protected spots for nature as well. And I just love the mix of Wales as a rural country, mixing it with like its industrial coal and slate heritage in particular. I just find like the mix of it and the physical manifestations of it here in Wales just really beautiful. And to be honest, I didn't actually go to university with the idea of actually working in heritage at all. It never really dawned on me as a career that I could go into. I connected to it. I went to university to actually just study the Welsh language. I'm a second language speaker, and through that, I got to dive even more into sort of Welsh heritage because it is really tied and connected to the Welsh language, and just being able to see like a physical manifestation of like Welsh culture as well as connecting to its language was just really beautiful. And like after graduating, again, I didn't think heritage was something that could be a career for me. So I actually pivoted to the Welsh arts sector. So working in the performing arts in the main, and I did that for a little while. But there came an opportunity with an organisation called Amgueddfa Cymru, which is National Museum Wales, and they run a chain of 8 museum and heritage sites across Wales. And I just went for it. It's in the field of youth engagement, and it had been something that I had done before in performing arts. But this sort of aspect of youth engagement within heritage is something completely new. And because of that, even though I would say I've been in the world of work, as it were, for a little while, I still consider myself quite early in terms of a heritage career. Like I said, this is my first one in the field, and whilst there is a bit of crossover, I still need to learn, and I do want to get more of like a 360 experience of working in heritage. And my role in youth engagement has been very focused in one area, but now it is progressing into more project management, event coordination, etc. So there's lots I'm still learning, and I'm looking for ways to progress further in that role. And in terms of just favourite heritage site, I think for me it's Tintern Abbey in the Wye Valley in Wales. For one, it's just an absolutely gorgeous building, and it's set across a really beautiful part of Wales if anyone's ever gone. And whilst I think it's not strictly a heritage site, but a great way to see sort of a lot of what Wales has to offer in terms of that is connected via the Wales Coastal Path, which runs all the way across the country now. So if anyone ever is visiting and wants to get in and see different heritage sites, a great way to do it is via the Wales Coastal Path. So that's my recommendation.
Yeah, so my name is Darcy, and I suppose I always knew that I liked kind of history and always enjoyed it in the sense like I enjoyed it at school, but I didn't really kind of pin down the kind of area that I liked about it or what really kind of captured me about history and heritage until a bit later, I guess, kind of sixth form, as I was thinking about what I wanted to do at university, because I knew I wanted to do heritage, or history, sorry, but I wasn't actually sure what I wanted to kind of study in particular. And I kind of came to realize that what I like the most is the kind of historic built environment. So I'd always be looking at kind of old buildings that are no longer used, and daydreaming as if I won the lottery, what could I do with them, that kind of a thing. And I just really like how buildings are kind of really symbolic of a specific period in history and in time, and that they're kind of also ever evolving. So they represent the kind of developmental history of the people who owned it and of the communities, and it's the fact that you can draw so much out of one building is what really hooked me kind of about architectural history and kind of looking at the historic built environment. And yeah, I went off to university and did history, and one of the courses that I could do in my third year was landscape history, and which I eventually went on to do for my master's. And this kind of encompasses so many things, and is something that I'm really interested in still and passionate about. So we covered things like design landscapes associated with country houses, so your big kind of landscapes, and then also things like agricultural landscapes, ancient woodlands, vernacular architecture, church architecture. So it really broadened my idea of what heritage and history is, and that actually, it sounds a bit cheesy, but it really is all around us. So the way that kind of roads are laid out in country lanes is impacted by kind of how the fields were farmed and things like that. So it's all this kind of layers of history and heritage. So it really, that kind of grasped me, and I got a new love of kind of landscape history and appreciating that side. I then, after my master's, got an internship with Save Britain's Heritage, and they're a charity based in London, and they campaign for the reuse of historic buildings. So that was kind of my first experience kind of working in the sector and kind of understanding the different areas of the sector, because it's so broad, and kind of figuring out what I enjoy. And it was a really great kind of environment to learn, and I learned so much. And I essentially got introduced to my current employer from from my internship. I met her for lunch and kind of picked her brains about her role, because she's a historic environment consultant, and I was like, I didn't even know that was a job. So I picked her brains, and I actually ended up doing some freelance work for her because she needed some landscape history advice. And then I was offered a part-time role at her consultancy, which then became kind of a full-time role, and I've now been there almost a year and a half. So I'm constantly learning, very much still new in my career, but yeah, constantly learning and figuring out that there's so much to this sector, which is what makes it really exciting, and especially as a young person. And then I suppose I'm going to choose a landscape for my favourite heritage site, because it would be bad not to. So one of my favourites, and this is, as you know, everyone said, it's really difficult to choose, but it's Rest Park in Silsoe, which is in Bedfordshire. And it's a really interesting landscape, because it's kind of formal pleasure grounds and a park, and it's associated with a country house. And its kind of main phases are from the 18th century and early 19th century, kind of utilising a 17th century base. So there's lots of different layers to it, and there's a lot to explore in the landscape, which I really love. Like, one of my favourite parts about it is there's a bathhouse, which is also sometimes referred to as the Roman bath or a hermitage, because it's all kind of built out of rocks and look like it's just happened to be there, but it's actually this beautiful bathhouse which they used to use. So yeah, I thoroughly recommend.
Hi everyone, I'm Grace and I'm from Glasgow. I've always loved history from a very young age, and I've always specifically loved stories, and learning about the different ways that people have lived through time, throughout the years, and how things have changed and how we've kind of got this society that we live in today. That kind of early love then led me to study history and English literature at Glasgow University before going on to do an MLit in interdisciplinary English studies at Strathclyde University. I've always been, through my degrees, I became really interested in the history of marginalised communities, and I've always really enjoyed unearthing kind of those new stories and those new perspectives, and making sure that every person's history gets to be told. Yeah, it's not just the same groups whose histories are represented. I specifically love the way that studying history and heritage can help you understand the present, especially in these kind of rather scary and often unstable times. I enjoy that it gives you the knowledge to stand up for people and to fight for your own as well as other people's rights, and to kind of prevent the repeating of the wrongs of the past. I think that's what history should always be used for. Heritage is really important, but it's also often really fragile, and I think I see this every day. We all do, on our phones and online and stuff. We see people's heritage being taken away from them daily, like for example what's happening in Palestine, and I feel like this is what really motivates me to keep going. There's a fight out there, and I would love to kind of play a part in ensuring that everyone's heritage survives, and not just survives, thrives. It's what we deserve. Very new to the sector. I worked at the Alistair Gray Archive in Glasgow. He's one of my favourite Scottish authors, so I loved that. It was amazing. And then this year I have spent the last year as the Scotland Heritage trainee with the Heritage Network, and I had the best year learning more about community regeneration projects across Scotland. It was something I didn't really know much about, but I've left. It's my last day tomorrow actually. And I'm kind of leaving feeling way more knowledgeable and feeling like I know the sector well, or a lot more than I did a year ago. So now, as my traineeship's coming to an end, I'm now on the job hunt again. So I'm looking for roles in heritage or the arts and culture sectors, specifically quite similar to Emily actually, like research jobs, outreach, and community engagement and working with young people and different like diverse groups. Yeah, so I'm going to echo what everyone else has been saying. This question is so difficult to answer, and I'm never sure whether to do a local one or somewhere that I've went on holiday, or I'm just never sure. But I've decided, it'll change probably the next time I'm asked this question, but I've decided to go for the necropolis in Glasgow because it's kind of been with me throughout my life, so I feel like I need to honour that today. It's a fascinating place full of such interesting stories. It's basically a Victorian cemetery in Glasgow, but you walk up High Street and it's like a massive big hill, and then all of a sudden it's just like a big exposed Victorian cemetery. It inspired one of my favourite books, Alistair Gray's Poor Things, which I absolutely adore. The earliest grave in the necropolis is from the 1830s, and it is rumoured. People say that Wee Willie Winkie was buried there, but I don't think he was actually buried there. I think he was buried in Toll Cross Cemetery, but he's got like a plaque there. So there's just loads of interesting plots and loads of interesting places in it. It's got an amazing view of the whole of Glasgow and beyond. And it just really speaks to kind of Glasgow's industrialisation, as well as like their kind of like gruesome medical history. You can see the old Royal Infirmary, you can see the cathedral. Yeah, it's just a really cool place, and it makes me weirdly nostalgic for a graveyard because my grandpa used to take me there all the time, and I vividly remember being terrified, but that's like that fear has now translated into love. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm based in Nottingham, and like everyone else, I've always been fascinated with history, especially looking at buildings and places, how much stories and narratives are behind, to say, bricks and mortar. I also loved geography as well, learning around how the world works and the environment and how to protect that. So it kind of led me to do human geography and history for my undergrad because I just couldn't pick one. During that time, like everyone else, I discovered heritage, and it's kind of all the dots came into line of what I like to do. And I didn't quite realise it's something that you can do for your career. And then after that, I wanted to kind of specialise my learning in heritage to learn a bit more. So I did a master's in heritage studies, which gave me a solid foundation of all the theory and aspects surrounding it. But also, similar to Grace, it really opened my eyes about the diversity in heritage and also the inequalities that is present and how some stories are represented or remembered or forgotten in speech marks, which is something I feel very passionate about, and I feel it's something that if you have a voice, you should speak about it. What I'm doing currently right now, I'm in that in-between stage. I finished my studies and I'm trying to figure out what I like to do. So one of those things, I'm currently doing a placement with Nottingham City Council as a conservation officer, just to really get some more knowledge around how heritage fits in the planning system, because it is an avenue that I would like to go into, and there's lots to learn and it's quite overwhelming. So hopefully I'll get there by the end. And yeah, like everyone else, it's really hard to choose one site, but I think my favourite one would be the Corn Exchange in Leeds. It's a place where I used to study a lot for my undergrad, and I just think it's such a beautiful building. As you come into it, you have this dramatic glass dome ahead of you, and it's surrounded by small independent shops, and they've done such a good job of regenerating it, down to even the little signage above each shops. And I just think it's an amazing example of what regeneration and incorporating heritage and historic buildings can do. And still to this day, I went there the other week, it's such a vibrant place with events and all sorts are going on. So yeah, I think that will be my favourite heritage site.
Hi, I'm Rosie. I'm based in the southwest, mostly Devon and Wiltshire. My journey into wanting to join the heritage sector began in 2023, so really quite recent. I was looking for any form of work experience over the summer between first and second year of my undergrad to add to my CV. I'd always had a bit of an interest in history, and I loved exploring historical sites, and my mum suggested giving conservation a go. I dropped an email to my nearest National Trust property, really nervous, because it's hard to find work experience in this sector, so it's sort of giving it a go. But they've been incredibly kind and generous with their time and supporting me in learning how conservation and collection care works. And initially I wasn't too sure if it would be for me, but I ended up absolutely loving it. I think the turning point for me was when I was clearing up some paintings from a house that the National Trust had recently acquired near Salisbury, and they hadn't been fabulously looked after. They were very dusty, very mouldy, a bit scratched up, so there's a lot to do to try and bring a bit of life back to them. And while cleaning, on the back of a frame, I found markings of someone practicing basic addition and multiplication. There were a few games of noughts and crosses, and I just felt so connected to it. But actions obviously really familiar but cut off by time, and although I never did my maths homework on a wooden frame, it was a really powerful moment of connection for me. And it helped me to see collections items as more than just objects but markers of historic reality, a living archive of the past in a way. And it was in this moment I realised that the heritage and culture sector was for me. I've recently finished my undergraduate degree in theology and religion at Exeter University. I had decided I wanted to study theology when I was about 14. I've always found religion so fascinating, especially the way that religion influences society and our perceptions of the world. I'll be graduating in about a month, so mid-July, and I'm very, very excited, but I'm definitely very early career. At the moment, I'm battling the graduate job market, unsuccessfully so far. My current plan is to try and spend some time working in order to save up money to do my master's. I'm unsure about where I want to go to do that, but definitely try and stay fairly southwest based. I'm currently applying for anything and everything, but I'd love to get an entry role in archives, but hard to come across. More recently, I've completed work experience with the collections team within the house, as I've already mentioned. I mostly worked on furniture, but loved paintings. I also completed a couple of days on an archaeology dig, looking for a castle on the Starhead estate. This was so exciting. I absolutely love doing a bit of archaeology. I came across quite a lot of horse bones, which I was absolutely fascinated by, as I find funerary archaeology really interesting. It's something that I've covered a bit in my degree, so shout out to Alice Roberts and Irving Finkel for sparking that interest. I love them. My dissertation and several of my final essays were based around funerary remains and archaeology, mostly biblical archaeology with bits of Mesopotamian and Babylonian thrown in there. I did an essay on the ethics of displaying funerary remains in museums, focusing on the increased digitisation of funerary remains, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, definitely very early career, but I'm so excited to see where things go, and yeah, feeling vaguely optimistic for the future, depending on how things go in the next couple of weeks and months and years. And yeah, I think, as everyone else has said, it's near impossible to choose just one. And even though I've already mentioned it in this podcast, I have to bring it up again. My favourite heritage site is Starhead in Wiltshire. I'm very lucky to be from fairly near there, so I visited many times throughout my childhood. I've always loved the nymph in the grotto. I've got a photo from about 2010 of me stood next to it, absolutely beaming. And the Temple of Apollo is just such a gorgeous building overlooking the lakes, and yeah, I just love up there. It's such a calm place. Very relaxing place and just a comfort place for me. Also bonus points for parts of Pride and Prejudice being filmed there. Fabulous.
So as the first kind of episode, we wanted to just introduce ourselves, and then also because the Heritage Youth Forum is focused upon young people in the sector, we wanted to kind of touch on points about what is like being a young person in the heritage sector, and also what the benefits of being a young person are and what we can offer.
I think in terms of what's the benefit of being a young person in the sector, to start off with, you sometimes, like, imposter syndrome can feel really overwhelming and strong when you're a young person in the sector, because you might be like the minority where you are. You might be working with other people who've had 10, 20 plus years in a particular role, or just in a particular sector, so it can feel the imposter syndrome can be really strong, and you sort of don't feel like your abilities and your skills are actually anything that can be worth contributing to whatever the cause is. But actually, the fact of us being a young person and being the minority is that we do have those alternative viewpoints and those alternative problem solving skills. There is such great benefit into having really developed, really good 360 experience, a wealth of knowledge behind that. But actually, being a young person and coming into something really does involve a lot of, it allows opportunities for your creativity to come through. It allows the ability of taking initiative. And it's a great opportunity as well to actually branch out. A lot of heritage sites have really good, strong engagement audiences with maybe like certain demographics. But when you are as a young person, can be branching out into other demographics that might not have realised like what heritage can do for them. If you think about how many National Trust properties or heritage sites have a really good, strong volunteer basis with people who might be slightly older. But if you are a young person who actually happens to be working in volunteering or supporting those volunteers, you are actually become almost like an ambassador for other young people to get involved in heritage. They can see that whilst you are the minority particularly, but you are encouraging others, and you then create like a sense of community. If we can get more young people working in the sector, we bring all of those new innovative problem solving creative skills into the field. And particularly when we're addressing the future of heritage and like what are the sort of problems that they're going to be faced with, maybe like the rise of AI, for example, or making sure that we achieve more sustainability goals. Being a young person means that we are happy and more willing to tackle those problems.
I'd quite like to echo that I think that one of the benefits of being a young person in the sector, and also a thing that we as young people can offer the sector, is that we are very engaged with those topics. I know, Kate, you mentioned kind of sustainability and AI, and I think young people are very connected both with each other through having grown up with a lot of the current technology that is there and has been developing as we've been growing up. We've been learning with it. And also, we live in such a globalized world now that as young people, we have an idea of kind of what's going on in other places. And so I think that can really emphasize to us what's important where we are, seeing what's happening in other places, and not only the kind of the crises and not only the bad things that are going on, but the good things and the maybe the best practice that's coming out of other places, and the efforts that are being made to preserve heritage and to put towards key issues like climate change and, AI and all of the developments that are happening within those topics. I think we're very good as young people at kind of keeping abreast of those and seeing how they're developing elsewhere, and maybe understanding how we might implement them in our own situations and contexts, and how we can, be a global community as well as a local community. And I think that is a huge benefit of being a young person in the heritage sector, as well as just being a young person entering into the world of work. But specifically, I think it's very useful in heritage as well.
Yeah, definitely, Izzy. And just like adding on to like the point I said earlier as well, like there are very specific, more specialist aspects of like the heritage sector or the heritage industry as well. Like if we can like have more young people in heritage craft making as an industry as well, like that is a huge benefit, because it means that heritage crafts are kept alive, and things like that form a really good basis for engagement initiatives at heritage sites themselves and in museums. In my workplace, we have like loads of heritage crafts people who will do live demonstrations for visitors, and that really adds something to the visitor experience. So if we can also get young people involved in that through like the offering and support of apprenticeships and funding for young people to enter that sector, enter that industry, it means those heritage skills are kept alive, and there is a generational link between the heritage that we all have collectively as a human being, but that young people can also feel that they're connected to as well.
I mean, I completely agree with that. I think I saw something on Instagram that the King's Foundation is doing, I think it's either 30 under 30 or 35 under 35, but that's a variety of younger people who represent different, I mean, they're not all heritage. Some things are education, but there are a couple of people who are. There's someone who's a stonemason, apprentice stonemason at York Minster, I think. And I mean, she's the next generation. I don't know if you've seen any of those programs where they sort of get, I can't remember, there's a program on Channel 4 where they got apprentices to kind of try out new techniques that they're learning. They're trying to learn in their spare time, or they're just early career. And they get help from experts, because once the other people retire, there's such a massive age gap, there's about 3 generations between the apprentices and the sort of experts in the field. So they're really having to try and close that gap very quickly before this group of people retire. I think what I'd also say is that there's a lot to be said for the energy that young people bring. I think we all know that getting a job is difficult as it is. It's difficult enough without it being in a sector that's maybe a bit different, a bit more niche, as some people might see it. I think I was saying this last time, that I think I kind of realized that it would be just as hard for me to get a job, any job. It would be just as hard for me to get something that I don't enjoy as it would be to try really hard to get something I do really enjoy doing. So that's what I'm trying to do now. But obviously with that, you need a lot of ambition and energy. And I think that's a lot of enthusiasm that can only be a positive thing for a workplace. I mean, when I was working as this apprentice in the Museums and Archives service, they had, I think the next youngest person was nearly 40. Everyone else was retiring. It's a very small team, and I was just there to help with whatever. So if you can imagine that being replicated across the sector in lots of different areas of the heritage sector, that can only be a good thing, because you're ensuring your services for the next generation. I mean, what are the negatives of that? It means that when those people retire, they know that they've got someone coming in after them who already has that knowledge. They're not having to train someone else up because they've trained someone as they've been there, over a long period of time. And I think sometimes, I don't know much about obviously being higher up in companies, but I think sometimes there's that danger of saying, oh, we know how to do it, so that's fine. But then obviously when those people retire or they leave or whatever, they go on maternity leave, anything, suddenly there's so much knowledge that's gone with that person that if you don't invest in the younger people to do that, that's it. The whole next generation's gone. Quite a long-winded way of saying that it's just the energy that we can bring as young people. I think that's a huge positive for the sector.
Yeah, definitely linking to all the kind of points that have been made. But I know in the kind of sector area that I work in, so as a historic environment consultant, we do kind of advise on historic buildings, and listed buildings and things, and kind of how people can get the best use out of them. And at a lot of conferences I go to and things, people say, well, we can have all these ideas, but it's linked to what Kate was saying. We don't have the people to do the crafts, so we don't have the stonemasons, we don't have all of these kind of essential crafts, which then means we can actually reuse these buildings and have them maintained for the long term. And young people, there'll be so many young people that would probably be really good at these crafts and these different parts of the sector, but I don't think there's the kind of routes to go into them are quite challenging, and there's not kind of a push for these in schools, I'd say. I don't know, it might have changed now, but I know when I was at school, no one came to talk to us about the importance of young people in the heritage sector and the importance of kind of traditional crafts and things. That just was not an option, when actually we can offer so much, because we're going to be custodians of those buildings or these sectors once, as Emily was saying, once people move on, they kind of leave, we're the next generation who's got to take them on and maintain them. And I know, especially if kind of talk about historic buildings, what excites me the most is when you can see that in a reuse scheme, let's say it's a community asset, youth voices have been taken into account, because you've got to make sure that a building is reused in the best possible way. And if the youth of that community are impassioned by it and really enjoy their building and how it's being used, then they're already engaging in heritage just by having that interest in the building. And I think there definitely is a lot that young people can offer, and a lot of ideas as well that can take kind of businesses, organisations into new avenues and routes, and that's really exciting for everybody involved. I think definitely more people should hire, more kind of companies should, I would say, take a chance. I don't see it as taking a chance, but they might, but they should just give people the opportunity. I think that's all the kind of people need, is just that first yes, and then you can really prove what you can do. Yeah, then you can kind of really make your mark.
I think you're right about kind of, it should be considered as investing in the future of heritage. I think kind of taking on young people and making sure that they have the roots and the ways into the sector and are able to build the skills and the knowledge that they will need to continue heritage, because that is what's going to be the future of it. And I do think a good example of this, which I've just seen recently, the National Lottery Heritage Fund put out a news item kind of a couple of weeks ago about two young people in heritage they've called it the Meet the Future Game Changers of Heritage. And it's young people who have kind of been given an opportunity through National Lottery Heritage funding to implement something that is going to help change the game, as it were, within heritage. One of them is a kind of natural landscape heritage and kind of environmental heritage project, and the other one is more of it's about an ex-mining community in Scotland, and they've been voted by their peers as game changers within heritage. And it's really great to see that being highlighted by such a big organisation as the National Lottery Heritage Fund, that young people are able to offer so much to the sector, and when you do invest in them, they give you back the return tenfold and really do help to kind of shore up, secure the future of the heritage that they're working on, and in innovative ways that maybe people who have been in the sector for a long time might not have thought about, or might not have considered to be something that they could be doing within heritage. And it's that kind of marrying up of preserving heritage, but using new methods, new technology, and new ideas. And I think that is a lot of what young people can bring to heritage.
I think that was kind of like your answers. It was quite a nice segue into the next section, which was how do we support young people getting into the workplace then?
Invest in them.
Definitely echo that. I think I've been quite lucky, I think, in my role. My our director, she's very much like, if you see an opportunity and you think it's gonna, help you develop, take it. And it's the best kind of advice because it's pushed me out of my comfort zone for one. And I think workplaces just have to be there to support young people in the sense we're still learning because we haven't, if you're already career, we haven't been in these careers for as long as other people who are quite established. So any chance to kind of develop our knowledge or go out and network and go out and talk to other people, I think should really be encouraged because that's the only way that the individual is going to kind of grow and learn, and then you'll get that return, you being the kind of workplace will get that return because they'll be talking to more people and talking about their work and then learning more and always feeding that back into the workplace. So it's that really nice kind of cyclical, as kind of like Izzy was saying, if you invest in your young person by giving them opportunities, it will come back and the cycle will kind of flow.
Izzy and Darcy have definitely raised a good point about investing in young people within heritage. If you're in that position where you've been in the sector for years, you do have that wealth of knowledge and those opportunities and connections that you can pass down onto a young person entering the sector. Even something just as simple as networking. I've been to a few conferences and you do walk into that room and everyone knows everyone and they're catching up, and while that's such a beautiful thing about the sector, how friendly it is, as a young person who doesn't know anyone, it can be quite intimidating. And like we've spoken about in this podcast, that imposter syndrome just come through. And relating that to a past experience I did a placement with Heritage Lincolnshire, and my mentor Alice was really good at giving me networking connections and making sure I'm speaking with the team to understand their role and kind of what a day in the life that might look like. And actually she's the one who suggested me to have a look into Heritage Network and the Youth Forum and see if I was interested to get involved. And I just think something like that is really helpful for a young person within their career development, and networking can be such a great tool to open those doors for someone, or even just a conversation.
What would be nice as well when we say support young people is that heritage as a sector can be very academic by its nature, depending on the role that someone does. And what might be good to really highlight for those who are in senior management or management positions in the heritage sector currently is actually supporting young people in heritage roles which aren't as academic. There might be an impression with a lot of young people that it's a very much desk-based. It can, in many ways it can be, and that it's very theoretical, it's very scientific, etc., or it's very technologically based as well in certain aspects too. But there's underappreciated roles within the heritage sector that young people might not realise that are for them, and might actually be better for certain young people. Like I know a lot of neurodiverse people, for example, or those that might struggle with dyslexia, just don't thrive in that sort of academic desk-based environment. Working in heritage sites where you would have like gardeners, where you would have craftspeople, you would have stonemasons, you would have reenactors in certain heritage sites as well, is actually a really cool way to support young people into a sector which it underrepresents them demographically as a whole. And whilst I do think we should definitely support younger people who want to do like the more academic side of heritage as well. Absolutely, we need those young people there, but also having opportunities for young people to look into those roles which are more physical based and more to do with heritage sites outside, or honing crafts, etc. I think we've got to cover all the bases when it comes to supporting young people.
I also think that if you have a young person, say you have like a trainee or an apprentice, like just because they might have the job and they might be like in the door, so to speak, doesn't mean that that's kind of everything. Like, don't become complacent. A lot of the times, the traineeships and stuff are only for a set amount of time, which is amazing, and you learn so much. But I still think you should be listening to them, and from the beginning to the end, you should be checking up with them and seeing how they're getting on, kind of helping them set goals, because they might not know exactly what they want to be doing. Like, they might know that they want to work in heritage, but they might not specifically know which area yet. So just yeah, and like never assume knowledge. If you're a manager listening, I say this all the time to people, but yeah, just never assume knowledge. You never know that. Try not to use acronyms. There's a lot of acronyms in the sector, so just try and never, because that is quite an elitist way of doing things and people don't always realise it. It's quite a harmless thing, but it can cause harm at the same time, because it can kind of like push you back, and then you don't want to ask too many questions because you don't want to like it come across like as if you're like silly or whatever, which you are not, and you're so valid to ask these questions. I also think the heritage sector, it's becoming a lot more inclusive, but there are still a lot of ways in which it's not the best sometimes. And I think we kind of need to get rid of those like more like inaccessible kind of exclusive way of doing things. So if you're wanting to encourage more young people to get involved, I know quite a lot of organisations are starting to do this, but offer bursaries to young people if you want to get them involved into your conference or your events, or discounted tickets, for example. There's a lot of reasons why young people would really love to be at these things but can't access them for a variety of reasons. So just being aware of that, not expecting young people to do so much like work and so much labour for free.
I think we've all
think
done
that's
that game of guess the acronym, haven't we? Trying to figure it out in our heads when we're in a meeting what someone's talking about.
The amount of times I've been like frantically Google searching, being like, what is that?
They all have their own ones as well, so you might know one from another job or like a different area that you worked in. And no, this is a different one now that you got to learn.
Yeah.
It's the same letters. They're all so similar to each other that you end up just going, okay, it's got a H and it's got an E and it's got a something else, and they all sound like they're going to be the same, and then they're not. I do want to pick up, Grace, on what you were saying there as well about kind of not assuming knowledge and not assuming kind of people's situations. And I think that's a really great point, and kind of how you can support young people is, I had it in my notes as a kind of a, don't assume that the young person that you're hiring, despite the fact that their application was great, don't assume that they're the finished product when they arrive, because everyone's got more to learn. And a young person coming into the sector, even if they've written a great application, will still have so many parts of the sector, of the job specifically, that they might not yet have learned. And making the assumption that they know that causes you to miss an opportunity for them to learn, and for them to miss an opportunity to learn. And I think just remembering that redoing something so that they can learn also helps you strengthen your own knowledge in that, and kind of having those opportunities for new learning. And also sometimes new things can come out of teaching somebody something. And again, that kind of not assuming that young people are able to come to things because you're putting them on and aiming them at young people. So not everybody's barriers are the same, and there is going to be different barriers to different things, and you'll find them, and sometimes you can't get all of the barriers gone. It's very difficult. It can be very difficult, but as much as you can do to remove those barriers will mean that you get a more diverse, more engaged group of people coming to the things that you want them to come to, and you will reach more people and be able to engage with them. And also that thing of volunteering, and understanding that volunteering for a lot of people is a privilege that they are able to do because they have some other form of support, and understanding that to access more diverse communities, you have to understand that they might not have that privilege to be able to volunteer, and so you have to find other ways for them to engage with what you're doing is very important. And the ways that you can support young people are many, and not all of them are volunteering, and trying to create routes into the sector and into jobs and into learning and knowledge and engagement that include things that aren't volunteering, or at least sometimes it could be alternative forms of volunteering digital volunteering, engaging in a way that isn't, I have to give up this many hours of my day and travel to a place and do free labour. Any way that you can remove those barriers means that young people will engage more and you will be supporting them and the future of heritage in what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. And also what Grace was saying about traineeships and apprenticeships. I think obviously because I was an apprentice, I can see it from that point of view now. And I think it's slightly different. It's a slightly different situation to just being a young person in heritage. So I'm speaking more specifically from the position of sort of getting an apprenticeship or a traineeship where you are specifically there to learn and everyone knows that you're there to learn because that's your job title technically. I think just get them involved. If you've got an apprentice or a trainee, just get them involved in everything, invite them to things, sort of say, oh, have you heard of this? That, just send them links to things. If there's something you've learned, a lot from, tell them about it, but also give them a bit of responsibility, not too much, because you don't want to freak them out and you don't want them to feel overwhelmed, especially if they've only just started. I know that when I was at the beginning of my apprenticeship, I was still very kind of reluctant to take on big projects because I still felt very, very much that I knew a lot less than other people. By the end of the 2 years, it was fine. It was as if I'd been there for years, but that's the learning process. But I think also if they are keen to learn and they find events that they'd like to go to or courses they'd like to do, if they're showing that enthusiasm, encourage that. Don't sort of say, oh, I don't know about that, because I know that the company I was working at, there were about 5 apprentices and there was one in each sort of main department, and you could really tell the difference in how they'd been supported. Some of them were just left to get on with the to-do list and they didn't really learn much and they left after a year. I stayed for the full 2 years and had a great time, and that was because I was supported the whole way, because right from the beginning they said, if you have any questions, nothing's a silly question. If you want to get involved with something, if you've got ideas, just tell us. If you've got new ideas of how we could do things differently, tell us, because we haven't had a new colleague in for the last 10 years or so. So it was just that fresh pair of eyes that they needed. But yeah, I think just if you've said, yes, we're going to take on a trainee or an apprentice, just get them involved in everything you can possibly, because they'll appreciate that, definitely.
And I think if you can as well, like if you can find opportunities to do training yourself on how to support young people, how to manage traineeships, maybe even like supporting different people's viewpoints as well, because you will have someone who's worked there in an industry and they might be engaging with a young person, and there may be some potential conflict, not in terms of like anything too extreme, but just maybe like a different opinions on how something can be approached. And if you can equip yourself in order to manage those situations in a positive way, that just means that you feel a bit more confident about managing the traineeship that is happening within your team. And also the young person as well as the other person would feel supported in that not one person's approach is prioritized or felt more important than the other. I think that's really important as well. It's not just the onus on the young person to integrate well. I think line managers themselves should, if they can, have the opportunity to train themselves up.
That leads quite nicely into the next bit, which is advice on having a manager. And kind of as a young person in a role, what is it like having a manager, and what can you expect, and kind of how do you deal with it, and what should you ask maybe? I know that for me, my kind of thing that I told myself when I started my role as a trainee was, nothing is a silly question. If you have a question, ask it, because you won't get an answer otherwise, and you might feel silly asking the question, but at least you'll know the answer. Whereas otherwise you'll feel silly and still not know the answer.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I think that's been also advice that's been given to me from various kind of people who've said, just don't be afraid to ask, because there's literally no point suffering in silence, because you're going to get yourself in a tiz and also not get the job done. So you might as well ask and then have the information, because and your manager or employer will understand that. They'll know that you're new to the role, new to the sector, and they were there once too, and they'll understand that you're not going to know how things work and what to do, and it's okay to ask all those questions, because then you won't need to ask them again. or if you do, that's also fine. But I definitely think that is a big piece of advice that people should follow, definitely.
I think my advice would be actually feeling confident to when you need to say no to something. And what I mean by that is that if you don't want to be in like a people pleasing sort of mode of working, because whilst you do want to do your absolute very best, but if you start taking on some things that are a bit too much and you're trying to complete too many tasks all at once, your well-being is going to suffer, your work is going to suffer, and like handling that relationship then with the line manager when possibly inevitably something might not go quite as right, or you take longer with something than expected. So I think if you can really sort of have that confidence to say, I need to complete the task that I have currently, and then I can work on this thing, prioritize the tasks in order, and have that confidence to say, no, not just yet, I need to do this, just means that the relationship with your line manager, it remains positive, and it shows that you are skillful enough and aware enough to know when you can complete a task to the best degree that you can, rather than try and complete it in the time that you have available, which means that like standards and like quality can suffer. And I know like as a young person, you want to be the absolute best that you can, because this might be your first role in the sector and you really want to do the best you can. So if you can be prepared to say no and be prepared to and self-aware of when you need to take that time for yourself, the relationship you'll have with your line manager will be much stronger.
So this was an episode of the Heritage Network Youth Forum's Brick by Brick podcast, and I was Izzy.
I was Emily.
I was Grace.
I was Darcy.
I was Becca.
I was Kate.
Rosie.